No?
It's recording.
Okay, it's recording. Okay, hi everybody, how are you? Welcome to the Kosher class, Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. right here at eyeshiva.com. I'm so excited to see you tonight, and I just wanted to start, first of all, by giving you guys, everyone, my email address again. I'll give it again at the end of the class. Please do not hesitate to email me with questions or comments, struggles that you have during the week, with stuff that we talk about or stuff that we don't talk about, anything at all, you can email me. So I'm going to type that into the chat room page right now. Okay, so I wanted to clarify one point about last week's class. Actually, I'm going to just do the entire second chapter of the Apisdorf book. I'm just going to kind of blow through those the first part of the glossary again, because I think those terms are really important, and they're terms that we use all the time when we're speaking about kosher. So I just want to review those, and I wanted to clarify a point that I made. So last week we mentioned that if you have only one oven, and say your oven happens to be meat, which it is in my house, you're not allowed to so pretend you made a baked potato in your meat oven. You are not allowed to put dairy sour cream and dairy butter directly on that potato. However, you are not required to wait 6 hours after eating that potato before you can eat dairy products. All you have to do is make your closing bracha, drink something. Actually, you should probably drink something before you make your closing bracha, and then you're free to eat something dairy immediately after you are eating the potato. You just can't eat it right with the potato. However, if you have vegetables that have been cooked in something meat, like if you have, say, carrots and potatoes that have been cooked along with a pot roast, or vegetables that have been cooked in a chicken soup, those have the status of being fleischig or meaty, which means that you do have to wait 6 hours after you eat those vegetables that have been cooked alongside meat, okay? So if they're cooked in the same pan with a big chunk of meat, a pot roast or a chicken or something, you're not allowed to just eat those vegetables and then immediately go into eating something dairy. But if you cook a vegetable alone in a meat dish, even though you can't eat dairy directly with it, you can just eat something parv, make your closing bracha, and then you can go right on to eating dairy. Okay, I hope that clarified a few things that might have been confusing from the last session. Okay, so I'm going to go back, and again, I'm going to start with the beginning of the glossary, which is chapter 2. And I'm just going to really quickly cover those first few terms. So the first section is called Meat and Milk and Keeping Kosher. The first term it has is blood. The Torah forbids eating the blood of animals and birds. Fish blood is permitted to be eaten. But the issue of blood spots in raw eggs also exists. You cannot have a blood spot in a raw egg. That whole egg needs to be discarded. And this is another reason why it's a good idea to check your eggs in a clear or white container before you crack the egg into like a clear Pyrex measuring cup or something before you put it into your cake or casserole, whatever you're making. Just make sure that there's no blood spots in it, because if you crack it right into the casserole, it could invalidate the entire thing. So please make sure that you crack eggs from now on into a separate container. Again, white or clear is the best, so you can really see those blood spots, and put them, after you've checked them, into the thing that you're making. Okay. Chav Yisrael is another term, and it's right here again in the book. It means Jewish milk. It means milk whose production was supervised by a Jew from the time of the actual milking until the conclusion of the production process. So most milk that is in stores today is regulated by the government of the United States and Canada. Okay, they make sure that no trace milk has been put into it. That's strictly cow's milk, and that's it. There's very strict laws that govern this, and so you can rely upon any milk that's been processed in the United States or Canada to be kosher. However, there are people who keep stringencies who want to go the extra mile and only drink milk that has been supervised by a Jew from start to finish. Faggy, I need that. Please bring that back here. My daughter's taking our food samples for today. So, again, you can totally rely upon the milk that you buy at the store, even if it doesn't have a hechsher on it. If it's produced in the United States or Canada, it's totally kosher and you can serve it to your family. You can drink it, no problem. But if you want to go the extra mile and keep Chalav Yisrael, you can do that too. That milk just it will say on it Chalav Yisrael, and it means Jewish milk, and it means that a Jew has observed the whole process. Okay, so back to eggs. Any egg from any kosher bird is okay to eat. Eggs from non-kosher birds are not okay to eat. So the two kosher birds that I know about that you can eat the eggs are chicken eggs and duck eggs. So those are both kosher, but again, you have to make sure that there's no blood spots in the egg before you use it, before you scramble it, before you anything, okay? When you're cooking hard-boiled eggs, it is wise, and actually I think it is a halacha, to cook more than 3 eggs in the pot at a time. This way, in case there's a blood spot in one of them, it doesn't invalidate the rest of the pot. This is something that you have to be really careful about. Just make sure that when you're cooking hard-boiled eggs, you cook at least 3. Goodbye. Goodbye. My kids just want to be in here. Joe, help. So, okay, so this next term is a Yiddish term, fleischig, and it means meaty. So when we say, hold on a second. Joe, the baby just fell. Can you please help me? So this can be used in a few different terms. If your oven is only used for cooking meat items, if you consider it to be a meat oven, you can say, my oven is fleischig, okay? Faggy, seriously. Get, mommy's busy. I'm going to take away your dinosaurs. So you can say that your oven is fleischig. Also, food that's been cooked in that oven is considered to be fleischig. Even that totally parved potato that's been cooked in your fleischig oven is considered to be fleischig. However, you can still eat dairy right after it. Just make a closing bracha and so on. So, cookware, dishes, and cutlery can also be called fleischig or meaty. And it can also mean if you just ate a piece of meat, you are required to wait 6 hours in between eating actual meat or pieces of vegetable or things that were cooked along with a piece of meat. You have to wait 6 hours before eating dairy, and people call themselves fleischig during that period of time. Like, say you just had a meat sandwich for lunch and someone offered you a piece of cheesecake, you'd politely demur by saying, no thank you, I'm fleischig. Okay? Naftali's asking if milk needs an OU hechsher. And again, I'm going to tell you that any milk produced in the United States or Canada, even if it does not have a hechsher on it, if it's produced in the United States or Canada, Rav Moshe Feinstein paskined, or he ruled, that could be considered kosher because the laws are very strict in these countries that you're not allowed to have non-kosher milk mixed in with the cow's milk, okay? So it doesn't even need an OU hechsher milk as long as you make sure it's processed in the United States or Canada. Doesn't even need a hechsher, just plain milk. Butter, yogurt, all that stuff definitely needs a hechsher, and you have to look carefully for that. And we'll talk about hechshers a little later tonight. Okay. Glatt kosher basically means that they have checked it's a term that refers exclusively to meat in the halachic sense. And it just means that they have checked the internal organs of the animal that has been slaughtered to make sure that there was no tears, no problems with the lungs, that it was a completely healthy animal. Okay, and that's called glatt kosher, and that's like the highest level of meat kosher that you can get. But however, people use the term glatt kosher loosely just to say like it's super kosher. It's glatt kosher. But you can't really say that about dairy. It doesn't really apply to dairy. It only applies to meat. It just means that the animal's been checked to be totally... Oh, eggs? Eggs do not need a hechsher. I'm sorry, Naftali. I'm going to just type it in here. So I answered that question. Um, there's a whole, on page 33 of the Apisdorf book, he goes into detail about what constitute constitutes glut and how it's derived after the slaughter of the meat. It's not something you really need to stress out about. Like a lot of meat in this country is glut kosher. If it's kosher, it's usually glut. So you don't really need to worry about it. But if you're interested, page 33 in the Apisdorf book, he goes into great detail about it. Okay, insects. Now this is a really important one. We do not eat insects. In the Torah, it says that certain locusts are kosher. However, we have lost the tradition, the oral Torah part, that says which of the locusts are kosher. So we do not eat any insects at all. And in fact, we have to be very careful on the produce that we take in to make sure that there are no insects, because even if you eat a tiny little thrip, and if you've ever seen a thrip, they're very microscopic, almost microscopically small. You can still see them with the naked eye, but they're really small. If you eat that, it's the same as if you ate an entire ham or a pound of shrimp. So make sure that when you're peeling your onions that you take out off both outer layers. When you're looking at celery, and you're washing it, make sure that there are no little bugs. You can see sometimes they make a little line. Lettuce also, it's very buggy. You have to be careful. Cauliflower and broccoli, it has all those nubs. So you need to make sure that all those nubs are washed out and that there are no bugs inside there. If you cannot see the bug, it's like it didn't exist. Okay, so those really tiny microscopic bugs you cannot see with the naked eye, it's fine. You're going to take some of those in anyway. But if you can see it with the naked eye, even if it's not moving, you do not eat it, okay? It's not kosher, and it's the same as eating ham. So please be careful. Kosher for Passover, we'll do a whole class on kosher for Passover when we get closer to that time. But basically, we don't eat any leavened or fermented grain on Passover. So even foods that are totally kosher during the year might not be kosher for Passover, like ketchup. It might have small amounts of ingredients derived from grain, so it's not kosher for Passover, although there is kosher for Passover ketchup. So just hold on to that thought. We'll do a whole class on how to shop for Passover when it gets to be that time. Okay. Kosher salt is a coarse kind of salt that you can buy in the store. It says kosher salt. And it's used to kasher raw meat. Now, a lot of chefs use kosher salt because it's coarse and it has a really good flavor. Hang on one second. What? Oh, it broke? Okay, Mommy will come look at it in a minute. But really, kosher salt is used by the butcher to draw the blood out of the meat. That's part of the process of making the meat kosher. Once it's butchered, it needs to be soaked and salted to draw all of the possible blood out of the meat. Now, we don't really have to do that today. Most of the time, the butchers do that for us. If you go to the store and you buy a box, a package of Empire chicken or Vineland chicken, that's already been soaked and salted for you. You do not have to worry about it. But kosher salt, that's what it's really used for. But it has a really good salty flavor. It takes very little to make a big impact, and it's got a coarse grain. So you can, use it in regular cooking. Okay, we talked about Fleischig. Milchig is the milk term in Yiddish. It means dairy. So, your cookware can be dairy, your cutlery could be dairy, your oven could be dairy, and you could call them all milchig. I have milchig pots, I have milchig spoons, so on and so forth. Okay. Milk and meat are never to be eaten together, never to be cooked together, never to be served together on the same plate. Do not combine any milk products and any meat products. That includes products that have a hechsher. Again, we'll talk about hechshers a little later, with a little D next to it, okay? Anything that has a D next to it should be considered dairy. Do not eat it with meat, okay? Two food items that are perfectly kosher on their own: perfectly kosher piece of cheese, perfectly kosher piece of beef. When you put them together, it's absolutely treif. So do not mix meat and milk. That's number one prohibition. Okay, parv is a term that means neutral. Parv foods are not meat and they're not dairy, and they can be eaten with either meat or dairy. This includes eggs and fish. Now, some people have a custom not to eat fish with dairy. You need to ask your local rabbi what your custom is, whether you eat fish with dairy or not. But it's totally fine to do so if your rabbi says it's okay. We don't, however, eat fish with meat on the same plate or at the same time because it says in the Shulchan Aruch not to do that. And if you're studying Kitzur Shulchan Aruch with my husband, I'm sure that he's going to cover that halacha. We don't eat fish and meat together at the same time. Okay? Let me see. Pork, totally not kosher. I don't even need to talk about it. On page 36, Rabbi Apisdorf goes into a little bit of the process of slaughter, kosher slaughter. Basically, it's done with a very, very sharp knife, so the animal doesn't even know it hit them. It's a clean, effortless cut. It's a super, super sharp knife, and so on and so forth. A shochet is the rabbi who does this sort of slaughter, and it takes many, many years to train, and they have to know all sorts of halachas. Okay. He also covers trabering, which is the process of removing the veins and the non-kosher fats from the animal. That, again, is done by the butcher. You do not have to worry about doing this in your house. Treif is the generic term for non-kosher. Treif actually means torn and refers to an animal that maybe died because of a tear instead of an actually like clean cut like we just spoke about. But it's come to mean colloquially anything that isn't kosher. So treif means not kosher, and you'll hear me throw that word around a lot. Okay, so waiting 6 hours. After you eat dairy, if you want to eat a piece of meat, all you need to do is eat something parv. You can, take a drink of Coke, a drink of water, or take a bite of like a piece of bread, make a closing bracha, and then you're free to eat your meat. I personally wait half an hour after eating dairy just to be safe. But you don't have to do that. You can, as soon as you make your closing bracha and eat something parv, you can totally move on to eating meat. However, after you eat meat, because meat is shreddy and it gets into your teeth and it's kind of just harder to process through your body, you need to wait 6 hours before eating dairy. So it's a good habit to get into when you make your closing bracha after eating your hamburger or after eating your steak, to look at the clock and mentally calculate, okay, in 6 hours, that'll be 11 o'clock, and at that point I can have my ice cream sundae. Okay? There are, however, parv ice creams and parv desserts, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which you can eat immediately after eating meat and not feel guilty. Okay, great. So, moving on. We're on that was the first part of the second chapter, and now we're going to go on to the second part of the second chapter, which covers kosher kitchen and kosher consumer. Just a few glossary terms, but they're very important, so I want to cover them very in depth. And if you have a question, please don't wait till the end. Type it in, and I will hopefully see it, and I'll be able to answer it. Okay, so page 38, he speaks of bishul akam. Now, bishul akam is a Hebrew term that means cooked by a non-Jew. Now, some foods are kosher when they're cooked by a Gentile, and other foods are not. So, bishul akam means foods that are not kosher when they're cooked by a non-Jew. Okay, and he speaks a little bit more in detail about this in the next paragraph, where he discusses bishul Yisrael. And bishul Yisrael means cooked by a Jew. So, the general rule is this. Foods that can be eaten raw, or foods that normally wouldn't be served for an important occasion, may be eaten even in a cooked state regardless of who was cooking it. As long as it's in a kosher pot, in a kosher kitchen, if a non-Jew cooked it, it would be fine. This is things that you could eat raw, and things that they say wouldn't be at a king's table. I see it broke. So that's totally fine. A non-Jew can cook those things, and you can still eat them. They're kosher as long as they were made in a kosher pot on a kosher stove. Foods that cannot be eaten raw or that would be served at an important occasion must be cooked by a Jew. And this is called bishul Yisrael. Now, these are it's a very important distinction. And we cannot decide for ourselves what's bishul akam and what's bishul Yisrael. We can't just decide, oh, I don't think that this would be served at an important occasion, so I'm not going to worry about if a non-Jew cooked it and eat it. You really should call your rabbi and talk to them if there's a question of the food. I recently had a non-Jewish friend come over, and we did a lot of cooking. And it was great because she was there, to help me. She made a lot of the food. But I made sure that I turned on the burner, even though some of those foods maybe were fine. Maybe they were not bishul akam. But just to make absolutely sure, I made sure that I turned on the fire. So the whole cooking process doesn't have to be done by a Jew. A Jew could just, for example, turn on the fire and it would be fine. Okay, as long as a Jewish person turns on the fire, everything's bishul Yisrael, and we're all clean and good. But if this question arises, I strongly urge you to call your local Orthodox rabbi. You could email me or you could call my husband and ask, is this okay? Okay, moving right along. A hechsher. Okay, hechshers are symbols or certificates that attest to the fact that a food is kosher and has been prepared under the supervision of a quality kosher supervisor. Okay, someone who knows what they're doing. So there are a lot of different hechshers that are okay. The most prevalent hechsher is OU, and I'm going to show you what the OU looks like so that when you see it on your food, you can be like, sure, that's kosher. Okay, so this happens to be some noodle soup, and it happens to be parv, so it'll say OU parv underneath it, but I'm just going to show you what it looks like. Okay, I hope you can see right here. Right here. It's a U inside a little circle. And that means that it's totally parv and that it's been supervised by the Orthodox Union. Now, that's the most common hechsher. You will see that hechsher with the little D next to it. That means dairy. Now, the OU does not have dairy equipment hechshers. That means that it might be a totally parv thing, but it was made on equipment that was shared with dairy. So they consider that to have the status of dairy. So that is very helpful. A lot of stuff is OU and OUD that you'll find in the store. M&Ms, lots of bread, sliced bread, and pasta sauce, so on and so forth. So you need to be start looking at your products and making sure that there's a hechsher. I make sure that I check the hechsher every time I cook because it has happened that I have bought things before that were not kosher. Okay, Naphtali has another question. It says at Safeway, sometimes dried beans have one, sometimes fresh carrots. Do they need it always? Okay, so fresh carrots do not need a hechsher. Fresh produce does not need a hechsher unless it's something that's cut. So you'll find those little like carrot coins, I think they call them, and things like that. Those need a hechsher because those have been processed. So if it's a regular raw carrot, like they just pulled it out of the ground and washed it off and put it on your shelf, that doesn't need a hechsher. But if it's something that's been cut or processed in some way, then it definitely needs a hechsher. Dried beans need a hechsher because you can get bugs. So please make sure that your dried bean bag has a hechsher on it, okay? And again, just before you cook, check. That's your general rule. Always look at the item before you cook it because it has happened to me that I've been whirlwind through the shopping center going at a fast clip and grabbed something that didn't have a hechsher or that the hechsher had changed. And so it's really important that products that I had always bought that were parv suddenly were dairy, and that happens all the time. So you really need to make sure that you check the hechsher before you cook, okay? Okay, moving right along. So, koshering. Koshering is the procedure for rendering utensils that have been used with non-kosher foods ready to use with kosher foods. Now, koshering procedures vary according to the type of utensil, whether it's, porcelain, metal, whatever. It also varies according to, the type of utensil, the material, and how it was used. So, I'm just going to give you the example he gives you in the book of a metal spoon that was used to store a pot of pork and beans. That may not be used at a kosher meal. But here would be the koshering procedure for such a utensil. You have to thoroughly clean it. You cannot use it for 24 hours, and it must be totally immersed in a kosher pot of boiling water. Now, in later chapters, he's going to get into koshering things. But I would just tell you, really, every time if there's an accident that happens, ask a rabbi. I'm just going to type that in because it's so important. Ask a rabbi. If you have questions, you can always call the Star K hotline, the OU hotline, or call your local Orthodox rabbi. If there's a problem, you need to notice, again, what kind of utensil it is, what the material is that it's made out of, whether it's metal, porcelain, plastic, how it was used, what it was used, and what it was used for, okay? Really, really important to ask your rabbi if something happens. Sometimes it's totally fine. You don't have to do anything to it. Sometimes it renders the whole utensil unusable, and sometimes you can kasher it. So really, really ask a rabbi every time. That's one thing I can just really impress on you. Okay. Keeping kosher is the colloquial term that just means somebody who follows the laws of kosher. That's pretty self-explanatory. Okay. Kosher airline meals. They're prepared by a kosher caterer, and they are provided to the airlines. They're double wrapped in foil so that they can be heated in the plane's ovens, even though tray food goes in there. Also, halakhically, there's a way that they wrap them that makes it so that they can be heated. Okay, fine, no problem. To get a kosher meal, you generally need to put in a request 24 hours before your flight, and sometimes they're really tasty. My husband and I were coming back from Prague a few months ago, and my goodness, that kosher meal was delicious. I wish I could eat like that every day. It was really, really good, and it had like very, very high quality hechsher on it. We felt very comfortable eating it. So don't worry about getting a kosher meal through the airline. It's totally available. If you're not able to get a kosher meal, tell the flight attendants that you're going to be starving, especially if you're on a transcontinental flight or something. They're happy to provide you with peanuts and chips. Most of the times those have hechshers on them. I remember flying on a JetBlue flight. They have lots of snacks, and the stewardess was so helpful letting me know which snacks were kosher and which weren't, and exactly what hechshers were on them. So ask your flight attendants. They're totally trained and well versed to talk to you about these sort of things. Okay, kosher bakery. A kosher bakery is a shop where only kosher ingredients are used in baking and only kosher food products are sold. Now, in some towns, my town included, there are bakeries where they have a parv oven and they make kosher stuff under the supervision of a mashgiach. And we'll get into what a mashgiach is later, kosher supervisor. So here, our bakery, our local bakery, it doesn't have a hechsher on it all the time, but there are certain goods that are baked in the kosher oven and they're under supervision. They're made with kosher ingredients and they keep all of this stuff separate. So if you don't have a kosher bakery that's all kosher in your hometown, ask around. Ask your other bakeries. Maybe they have kosher stuff. Call your rabbi. Ask him where he gets his bread, where he gets his cookies, and so on and so forth. Always helpful to have friends and to ask around, okay? Moving right along. Okay, so on page 42, he has a big star that says it's the law, and it says the disappearing drop. If a few drops of milk accidentally splash into a pot of meat sauce, this will probably not make the sauce non-kosher. As long as the ratio of milk to meat is at least 60-1, the milk is considered to have been insignificant and totally dissolved. One can eat that meat sauce without any concern that they're mixing meat and milk. So 1:60 is the golden ratio that you have to remember. Now, I would still call and ask my rabbi if this happened. He would ask me, is it less than 1/60th? And I could guesstimate and say yes or no. It's really, really important to make sure that you can see, is it less than 1/60th of the whole thing, because the rabbi will definitely ask you that. But always, always, always call your rabbi. Don't try to guess on your own, because that's where mistakes happen, and you definitely don't want to make a mistake. Okay. Kosher butcher shop is just like a kosher bakery where only kosher meats are sold. They should be soaked and salted, and it's only kosher. Again, there are some butchers and some shops where they have meat that is kosher, next to the non-kosher stuff. And you just have to be very scrupulous about checking your hechsher every time and check before you cook. Okay. A kosher home is a home where the occupants observe the laws of kosher and maintain the kosher kitchen. Okay? This means that all your utensils are kosher. You have separate meat, separate milk dishes. The oven is either meat or dairy, or maybe you have separate ovens. But everything in the home is adherent to the kosher laws. Okay, so some people keep a kosher home, but they're not so careful when they eat out. People call this kosher in and kosher out. According to Jewish law, I should tell you, the rules of kosher apply everywhere. It's not just when you leave your house, suddenly you don't have to keep kosher. No, they apply at home, in the office, in a park, in a restaurant, on the street, anywhere that you go. You need to be aware of the kosher laws. Only eat at kosher restaurants where you trust that there is a good hechsher. Do your research. Sometimes, I can always find something to eat, I say. Sometimes they have just a piece of fruit with the skin still on. That's no problem. I can make a bracha. I can just check that real quick for bugs, and I'm good to go. So really, 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 the rules of kosher apply no matter where you're at, despite what some people may say about keeping kosher in and out. Okay. The kosher kitchen is a kitchen in a home or restaurant where only kosher foods are prepared and the rules of keeping kosher are carefully adhered to. Here's a note. Large institutions sometimes have separate kosher kitchens, and that is totally fine. That means that all that stuff is kosher, but you need to ask. You need to prepare. If you're going to an event and they say it's kosher, call ahead. Ask them, who's the mashgiach? Who's the kosher supervisor? Do you have a separate kosher kitchen? And just, arm yourself with information. That's the best thing you can do. Okay. Kosher plates and cookware. When you refer to plates or pots as kosher, it means that a certain set of dishware and cookware was designated to be used exclusively for either meat or dairy and not both. Never meat and dairy together. The plates have to be meat or dairy. They cannot be both, okay? Kosher food that is cooked in a non-kosher pot will render the food non-kosher. Most probably. Again, ask your rabbi. Ask a rabbi. Ask a rabbi. Ask a rabbi. If I could say it a bazillion times, just if you're in doubt, call a rabbi. Call the Star K hotline. I'm going to put that up in a little bit. Call the OU. Okay. Everybody makes mistakes, but it says consult with your rabbi before doing anything drastic, and that's like the best advice I could give you. If you take anything away from this class, ask a rabbi. Okay. Kosher restaurants. Kosher restaurants only prepare and serve kosher food. These restaurants come in two varieties, meat or dairy. I have seen one parv restaurant my whole life. They did not serve either meat or dairy, and they just served like pretzels. And I think parv smoothies with soy milk. So, Chinese restaurants are always meat. Pizza restaurants are always dairy. You're not going to have a restaurant that's both. They can only be meat or dairy, but not both. Okay? For a restaurant to be kosher, it should be supervised by a rabbi or a recognized kosher supervision organization. So it might say, like if you're in Baltimore, might say supervised by the Star K. If you're in New York, it might say supervised by the OU, and so on and so forth. So make sure that where you're eating is supervised. Okay. Kosher shrimp. There's no such thing as kosher shrimp, but you might hear of faux kosher shrimp, which means it's like whitefish or carp or another kosher kind of fish that's molded to look like shrimp. We'll talk about marasayan a little bit later, which is basically fooling people into thinking they're eating something kosher when it really isn't, or something that looks not kosher but is. Those are very, very fine lines, and we'll talk about that in a future class. But you can buy faux kosher shrimp, which is just whitefish made to look like shrimp and taste like shrimp. You can also get kosher bacon. Smart Starts makes a really delicious parv bacon, actually, that you can, and bacos are also parv. You can totally put those on your salad. So if you miss that smoky bacon flavor, indulge in some bacos. Okay. Now, here's another really, really important point is kosher style food. And he mentions knockoff Gucci lookalike purses that you can buy in Chinatown. It looks like Gucci, but